with us. It is Thursday, which means it's Issues Day. We take a look at issues facing us as a nation and try to dig behind the headlines, go deeper, get a better understanding of what's going on in our world. And so today we are so grateful to have Yonathan Moya with us. Yonathan is the founder and executive director of Border Perspective, and I've been following their work for a long time, and so grateful to have you with us. So thanks for being with us, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your work?
Thank you, Dan, for the invitation, and thank you for hosting just this podcast and this conversation. I'm excited to share with you today, especially on today's topic, issues, right? And in many ways, what we're doing at Border Perspective is just right in the forefront of many cultural and conversations that are happening, many political conversations that are happening, even though we're not a political-based organization, right? But policy does very directly impact the people that we work with. And so Border Perspective, in a nutshell, we serve immigrant families on the South Texas and Mexico border. We advocate for biblical justice, right? And a better way to love our neighbor the way that God intended. And then we help mobilize groups and churches to actually come down and immerse themselves and actually engage more, really to go beyond the headline and to visit the South Texas region, learn about the culture, the borderlands, right? And really, hopefully that through that experience, they can expand their perspective and their knowledge on not only the region, but a people and the population that is often what I would think is often misrepresented and misunderstood.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so today we're talking about immigration, we're talking about the border, and specifically what's been going on at the southern border lately. We've got a new administration and hopefully a new direction, but there's also some troubling signs. They're opening more detention centers for children at the border, and when you see a headline like that, it's troubling to me. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on that. What's really going on down there? Is it as bad as we think it might be? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Totally. Well, thanks for that question. And as we're speaking today, right, like there have been, especially in the last 24 to 48 hours, just a lot of headlines that are talking and really posing the question, like, what are these migrant, shelters or kids detention centers or children, detention centers, what are they? And so I want to give a little bit of context just before I think we dive right into that. And so I myself actually didn't know a lot about detention centers until I started hearing them about in the news, especially when the zero tolerance policy was in place under the previous administration, and even just how people were being detained, and in many ways, all the inhumane stories, right, and the graphical experiences that people were facing. And so in 2017, I actually did an entire border length trip where I wanted to expose just what was happening on the border by actually navigating it and journeying this same region. And so that's where I first came across even just a detention center that was in the region where I grew up. Less than 5 miles from my parents' house where I grew up as a kid, there's a detention center. And I didn't really even know what it was. I didn't know what it looked like. But especially in 2017 and 18 and 19, when actually I would travel by there and would look, there was an overwhelming amount of people. There were with a facility that is often enclosed, you don't get to see what's inside, right? And I think that's intentional. But in the midst of the crisis that was happening several years ago, these facilities were overwhelmed. So people were actually in military tents, and you could tell that there was hundreds, of people that were under the Texas heat outside of this detention facility because of how overwhelming the migrant crisis had become on the border. Mm-hmm. And so that's obviously when we started hearing about kids in cages, when we started hearing about just the inhumane, even like the fact that some children were separated from their families when they were being detained, that maybe they weren't, people weren't being fed, people, even detention centers were turning away donations from humanitarian groups and nonprofit organizations. Like, and so um, that is a very raw description of that, but unfortunately, that was also reality.
Mm.
And in many ways, I talk about that, and it's a sensitive topic because it's ultimately people's lives that are at risk here, right? I think no matter the legality of the situation, I think I don't want to be a part of a solution that is going to only propose inhumane treatment for another human being. And
Yeah.
I think that's why this topic has become so sensitive to many of us. I think even just politics aside, like no human being should be treated in an inhumane way. And I think when I hear just these news about new detention facilities started to open up again, that's where my mind goes back to, right? And maybe your mind goes back to as well, and you start questioning, like, are we really going back there again? And the reality is that a lot of immigration processes on the border were actually halted and paused due to a policy called Title 42 that the previous administration used to close the borders and to really stop a lot of immigration processes along the border, and especially to deter people from coming, through the border. And so, as the Biden administration has taken over and they've been signing executive orders and uplifting some of these policies, there is right now a lot more people that I think, even if the message is not the borders are open, somehow they think the borders are open and they're coming. And they're
Mm.
either they're either trying to come through a legal process, and many are also coming through an illegal process or illegal entry, you can say. And so, to be quite frank, like, I've been just tuning in to a lot of what's happening in the region where I grew up, and I'm it's not it's in the news. I mean, you can search it. Hundreds of people are coming through, and they're giving themselves up to border patrol as we speak. I mean, groups of
Mm.
100, 200, 300 just in the South Texas region. You amplify that border region to a 2,000-mile radius, like, just think about how that number is going to increase along the border. So detention centers, it was interesting, as right after the Biden administration took over, at least in the South Texas region, there was news about two different type of temporary detention centers actually being built. And to me, because I've seen what's happened in previous years, that's only a sign that the administration is preparing, because there's more of an influx of people that are going to come through and they're going to be processed. And so that for me is a warning sign, because I think we know how overwhelmed the system has been in the past. We know how inhumane the system